Hello and welcome back to the Matrix Green Pill podcast. I'm Hilmarie Hutchison, and today I am so excited to introduce Anne-Marie McQueen, a seasoned digital journalist, podcaster, and former national columnist with over 30 years of experience spanning North America and the Middle East. Anne-Marie has made a significant impact in the realms of science, healthcare, and wellness journalism, becoming an early adopter and disruptor in the media landscape. She is the founding editor of the first health and wellness platform, Live Healthy, in the Middle East, and the creator of Hot Flash Inc., a global platform dedicated to providing evidence-based information for women navigating perimenopause, menopause, and midlife. Wow. What an accomplished lady. Anne-Marie McQueen, welcome and thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
So for our audience who might not know you yet, could you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background?
Okay, so I am Anne-Marie McQueen. I'm a journalist, always wanted to be a journalist. I come from Canada and I spent probably half of my career there before I moved to the UAE to help start the national newspaper. So I was on the launch team there. So it feels like I've had two lives because I did the early journalism, back when it was a fax machine and a notebook and a landline and maps to find places. And as I moved up the ladder in Canada, sort of adapted and then never, ever thought I would live overseas, but found out this newspaper was launching in Abu Dhabi and just knew instantly that I had to do it. And I just never changed my mind about it. And then that began the adventure in 2008. And I'm still here 16 years later.
Amazing. How many people do that? They come for a bit, they come for a stint, and then end up just falling in love with the place and staying. Impressive journey. As I mentioned in the intro, digital journalism, podcaster, all these different things that you've done. What drew you to focus on science, healthcare, and wellness?
Well, it's funny because when you look back, I'm 54, and when you look at how things have evolved, it's not like I had a grand plan. If you spoke to me at 25, my grand plan would have been, I want to work for the New York Times, or I want to be on 60 Minutes, which is a show in the US. That's not what ended up happening. And you just sort of take a step here and there. I always wanted to be, a political investigative reporter. And I've done that in my career. When I was 27 and my mom was 53, she died of pancreatic cancer. And in the fullness of time, I can now see that I've been trying to understand how that happened and how she had quite a few health challenges in her life and how that all fits together. And I'm still sort of putting together the pieces from that puzzle, but I wouldn't have been able to probably tell you that even 10 years ago, or definitely 20 years ago.
A young age to lose your mom. I'm sorry about that. But as you say, you've had a lot of learning since that time. And this is what inspired you then to get into the healthcare and wellness side of things. What inspired you to start Hot Flash Inc. And how did your experiences as a journalist and columnist influence the creation of this platform?
Well, when I came over to the UAE, I became an editor, and that gave me a whole new basket of skills. I was a news editor, and then I became arts and life editor and features editor. And so I was doing a lot of health and wellness and pulling content together, using social media, using our digital tools, using video, just telling a story in any way. I'm obsessed with content. At the same time, starting in my early 40s, things started to go awry for me. First I had some real mood, sleep, panic attacks, just really started to not feel great. And a lot of strange physical symptoms. And I was going to a lot of doctors. And what I didn't know was that I was in perimenopause. It was at that age. Menopause happens at about 51, although it varies for everyone. And it can be years before. And when your hormones start changing, things can really go awry. I didn't know any of this. And when I was 47, I think I skipped a period, which is your first real evidence that it's going on. And then I started looking into it. I'm like, okay, this is what's going on. Took me a long time to put things together. I started looking for information, which is what I do, right? When there's something that happens to me, I often end up writing about it and creating content about it. I just didn't like the information. It was one-sided. It was fear-mongering. It was designed to sell products. It was just not what I would produce myself. And I started to think, geez, I think I could do a really good job on this. And it was just the beginning of sort of independent journalists having newsletter very early. But I started to think, if I just had a newsletter, I could do such a good job and make this my beat. I didn't have all the tools then, but their tools weren't available to do that on your own, but it was starting. And so I started to think about it and I started to become more and more convinced that I could do it.
Right. So it was really a need that you saw in your own life, not enough information out there, not enough information you could trust. So you figured, well, there's a gap here. I can fill that gap by providing evidence-based, expert, experience-based information, going through the same thing that you were going through.
1,000%. And also, I was really embarrassed that I didn't know about it because back in Canada, I think I was about 37 and I wrote about menopause and I interviewed experts who said this is going to be a big thing. And it's become even a bigger thing since I realized it at the age of 47. But I remember thinking, I've got all these tools. Like I should have known about this. What about women who don't have the tool? They must have like less of a clue, you know? So that's where I thought, okay, I can do what I need, but I know other women have to need it too. It's so confusing.
Absolutely. I absolutely love that you saw that gap to create a solution for that. I was in the same position. I didn't know all that much about anything. Just go through life and you think, well, okay, well, this is the next step, you know, without actually knowing what your options are, what to expect, what's going to happen next. So I think it's absolutely brilliant that you've created this platform for other women to benefit from as well. Just going a little step back, you mentioned earlier that your career in media has been a long time, back in the days of the fax machine, right up until now. What challenges have you faced transitioning from traditional journalism to digital content creation?
Okay, so here's the thing. It hasn't been that challenging. Of course, every new thing you learn is challenging and you want to throw your back of your hand on your forehead and not do it, right? It's challenging to learn every new tool and every new skill. It wasn't like one giant hurdle because I have embraced things as they've come at me, if that makes sense. I remember taking a coding course in my late 20s, even though I didn't really understand coding. But when our newspaper had blogs, I did a blog. When social media came, I embraced it. When video became so much more ubiquitous, I embraced it. When I took over as an editor web, like I got a podcast. I learned how to do a podcast. I learned how to do a podcast myself. You know, they're all terribly challenging. And I've had so many frustrating moments making a website, figuring out what tool to do my newsletter on, figuring out what distribution platform for my podcast, figuring out how to make clips for social media, and then finding out there's a new app that does it for you. All these things are little challenges, but the biggest challenge is if you don't keep up and you don't embrace the new things. And I've watched my colleagues do that. You know, if I wasn't the kind of person I was, this just would have seemed insurmountable. I remember telling my best friend what I wanted to do, and she's like, how are you going to do all that? Well, I figured it out as I went along, and the world's been providing me with, AI is giving us so many tools. But I think the key is just keep up as you go because it's too hard to do it all at once.
I get the sense you've got a very curious mindset, very open to learning is what kept you going. So as you say, if you just keep at it as it's changing, then it's not suddenly this big thing you're dealing with because you've been building on your tools along the way. And so it's not suddenly, wow, now I've got everything's digital. Where do I start? As everything is progressing, you are progressing along with it, not saying, well, I'm doing it the old school way. This is the way I do it. You've just gone along with it. And that's why you say today, well, it wasn't that hard. But as you say, for other people that didn't keep up with the technology at the time, they would say, why, this is way too much to get started into something new.
And I will say one thing, like it's not easy, any new thing you use. And I've worked with people that have said, I don't do that. I'm not doing that. I have learned along the way something, and I call it just the trajectory of new things. It follows the exact same pattern. So, someone hired me to launch a website for them when I did Live Healthy. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to do the website. There's excitement. And then there's the moment where you're like, oh my God, when you realize how hard it is to learn and it feels like you're not going to be able to do it, you get mad. Why am I doing this? I remember it was a particular weekend. It's like other people are out having fun and I'm trying to figure out how to make this website. And then there's just when it starts to click and you are able to do it and you feel so much stronger and better. And it's not just about keeping up and doing new things at work. This keeps you running as a human. This keeps you like well-oiled, I think, challenging yourself in this way. Just kind of like people who do ice baths, and saunas. I feel it's the same thing, but for your mind and your flexibility.
Yes. And that sense of accomplishment, once you finally get your head around it, you say, once I know, I know. Get to the know part that can be very frustrating, but so rewarding when you have challenged yourself. And I agree with you 100%. I think it keeps you young. to keep your mind active, to be challenging your brain, to be working rather than just going stagnant because you're now not willing to try something new. I love that mindset that you have. Brilliant. Along sort of similar lines with changing things, as the founding editor of Live Healthy and the creator of Hot Flashing, what are some of the key trends you've observed in the health and wellness?
One of the things that I've noticed, and I've fallen prey to this myself, is thinking that the answers are outside of you. There's a whole industry set up to keep you thinking that. That just continues being a trend. You see it in everything, like the new superfood. I saw a headline the other day, like Boswellia is overtaking turmeric as a superfood. So then you think, oh, I get some Boswellia, like that's going to save me from disease. You see someone on social media and they've got a plan and it's like the greatest plan. And we've got these for everything now. I mean, we've got this for fitness and nutrition, and we've got it for trauma and processing trauma and dealing with troublesome relationships. And I think that the overriding sense that the solutions lie outside of you keeps us in a state of dependence. And a lot of the people who sell these things stoke some kind of fear or a sense of inadequacy in you. And that's how we're very able to be marketed to. And I love the tools. I mean, I've taken coaching courses and I love products and supplements. I, over the years, have developed, and it's hard won, but a knowing that I actually know what's best for me and other people don't. If I could say there's one overriding trend that people should watch out for, that's it. Otherwise, it's just, my gosh, 8 glasses of water a day. Tomatoes are good for you. Eggs are bad for you. Meat is good for you. It's just around and around the bend. Like oat milk is good. Don't drink oat milk. You'll just be pulled hither and yon. And when it comes to things like foods, I've become very aware that there's almost everything. I used to think that I was really good at spotting trends, but sometimes what's happening behind the scenes is a company has come out with a product and they're just paying for attention to it. So you're seeing it everywhere, and it's because other people are picking up on it. And, I think oat milk is a really good example of this, because oat milk is not great for you. It's not good for a lot of people's guts. It doesn't have any protein in it. Yeah, it makes a nice latte, but it's the kind of thing, if you delve into oat milk and you delve into the PR campaign and the industry that pushed that, that's a really good example of this. That's a really good test case for you to understand how ubiquitous this is.
I remember when I lived in the States for a while, soy milk was huge. I just replaced milk with soy milk, and I had soy milk in everything. I loved it. It was brilliant until I got Hashimoto's. And I didn't want to go on medication, so I did a ton of research and figured out soy is one of the things that can cause it and can make the symptoms worse.
Isn't that crazy? Yeah. You were drinking it and giving yourself and this happens all the time. When you look at that wall of plant milks, there are maybe 1 or 2 boxes on there that aren't filled with ingredients you don't really want in your body. And every time I look in the supermarket now, I'm like, wow, what a sales job.
As you say, it speaks to our fears. We want to do the best for ourselves, and then we end up actually doing harm. It's obviously not what we want to do. Now, I know that you launched Hot Flashing during the pandemic, if I'm correct.
Yes.
What were some of the challenges that you faced during that time launching Hot Flash?
Well, I'd been thinking about it for a long time and I was very, very busy. Anyone who wants to launch something is just nerve-wracking because you're not going to be doing that thing, right? The challenges were I just didn't know how to do it, newsletter product to use. I wasn't sure how to promote it, or just the nuts and bolts of getting the initial thing off the ground. What happened in COVID was I just had a bunch of freelancing dry up. I was very slow to realize it. Live Healthy, we cut way back. It was just a big time of fear and no one knew what was going to go on. So some of my contracts that I had, like reviewing restaurants and doing things like that, they were just like boom, boom, boom. I was not scared during COVID. Like I felt pretty feeling of calmness. And I just thought, if I don't start this now, I will never start it. You've been given the time. So I took a nice 4-day break and then I launched it. And I'd say the challenges are just constantly wondering if I'm using the right tool, if I'm doing it right, how I should be marketing it. Is it growing fast enough? How am I going to make money? Is this the right expansion to do? Is this the right person to work with? Am I writing the right thing? Just that.
Wow, amazing. And how has it grown since you started? What does it look like for you?
So it started with a newsletter on MailChimp, which was not the right tool at all. And I had about 200 people that, friends and family and some people I'd met in the UAE. Looking back, I could have made it much bigger and should have, but I didn't. And you make mistakes along the way. It's grown now to, I have 6,000 subscribers. I've moved it over to Substack. I have paying subscribers, added a podcast really early on when a brand in the US came to me and said, we'll sponsor your podcast. Not many people get to start a podcast with a sponsor. So that was a pretty interesting experience. Learned all about where to host your podcast, how to host your podcast, growing on social media. All of that stuff has just been a super learning experience. And I will say AI has incredibly helped because, for example, my podcast, I was paying people to edit it. And I have a background in broadcasting and I found it like I spent a lot of time preparing it for them to edit. And I've since found a tool called Descript, which is amazing. I can edit it myself. It makes clips for social media. There's just the things that used to take hours and hours and hours are now taking minutes. It's helping me sort of 10 times myself, I would say.
Amazing. And a big part of overcoming the challenges, a big part of the growth is finding the right tools. I absolutely love that. And that is just because you're out there just trying different things, testing different things and seeing what works for you.
There's a couple things I didn't foresee because it's just no one's done this. I'm the only journalist in the world that's made this their beat. There's other journalists who write about it. They often are writing about it in sort of like a cheerleading way, like I went on hormone therapy and this is why. And I'm just really approaching it from an objective view. But I did not foresee that I would link up with so many people all over the world. So I traveled last year to New York. I was on a panel with some, famous people and doctors for Peri, which is a community for perimenopause. That was outstanding. I know doctors around the world. I'm deeply connected. I'm in a group called Menopause in England, where we're trying to bring just a sort of a more moderate view because there's a huge push for hormone therapy. No problem with it. It's just the pendulum always swings. And beautiful women I've made friends with, in Australia and New Zealand and Africa and Canada. And it's just that part where I'm a voice. I'm known as that voice, which is what I set out to do. And that makes me feel really good.
You certainly have accomplished a lot in a relatively short period. I mean, if you started this in 2020, you've created that space where you are recognized for this. So let's dig a little deeper into the question of perimenopause. I know that you emphasize the need for a perimenopause game plan. Could you maybe share what a game plan might look like and why it is essential for women to have one?
We don't really know. Are women ever having a harder time in perimenopause and menopause? It seems like it. Women go through this to varying degrees, and some women have no problem at all, and there's differences in different parts of the world. There is a sort of theory that there's a evolutionary mismatch, that we're under a lot of stress and strain and toxic load and mental load, and then that's hitting the time when our hormones recede and we're vulnerable. And this is being sort of a more difficult situation for women. And I know it was just like I hit a wall in my early 40s. When I look back, it's like, okay, how did I arrive in my early 40s? I arrived as a person who worked like a maniac, exercised like crazy, had early adverse childhood experiences, also sort of little T trauma that I hadn't dealt with and wasn't aware of. I had unhealthy relationship patterns. All of us are surrounded by the products we use, have toxins in them. I've had gut problems for years, but I was just living with them. And I didn't know that when I hit my hormonal, the flux of perimenopause, that was going to make life really, really difficult. If I was going to advise younger women, like get ahead of this, figure out what your adverse childhood experiences might be. And there's so many ways that you can sort of start to process that. Inner child work, somatic healing. It doesn't have to be traditional therapy. What toxic products are you using? What is your air quality like? Are you happy in your relationships? Are your relationships equitable? Do you like what you're doing in your work? What are you doing to avoid the pain of life? Do you exercise too much? Have you had restrictive dieting for years? What hormonal problems do you already have? Many women have PCOS and endometriosis and thyroid problems that they haven't unearthed. It's a real mind, body, soul shift, perimenopause and menopause. And I just can't help feel that if women could organize some of that stuff before they hit the actual recession of the hormones, I'd like to see what would happen. I think they'd have a much easier time.
Yes, knowledge is power. By you creating this platform where women can come and gain this knowledge without having to spend hours and hours digging, you've created the platform to make it a lot easier to go through these questions and answer them and find out what are the tips, what are the shortcuts to quickly figure out what's going to work for me and what might not work for me. Again, a brilliant solution that you've created for other women. There are many negative narratives around menopause. How does Hot Flash Inc. work to debunk these myths? And what are some of the most common misconceptions you address?
Well, one thing I have done from the beginning is I just don't perpetuate the old tropes about menopause. Like you see some really awful memes about the seven dwarves of menopause. They're always about chin hairs, about being angry and chubby. And I just don't use any of that. I don't think they're funny. And I think that's the negative stigma sometimes women perpetuated about themselves. There's still this connotation that there's something embarrassing about it, or that you somehow become over the hill, useless, used up when your fertility finishes. When you look in the animal kingdom, killer whales, elephants, some other creatures go through menopause. And some scientists have developed a theory called the grandmother hypothesis for why this might be so. It's just really broadly speaking, not only do they help with the rearing of their grandchildren, they just impart so much wisdom and care for helping their entire tribe. The Hasta women of Tanzania, they gather more food. They need to eat less. They're just on fire. We've got everything we've pulled together. We've gone through menopause and we're here to help. We're here to pass on that knowledge. And so I think if you can start to reframe it that way, it can be a lot easier within you. And then, you won't perpetuate that. It's in each woman's job. But we are up against a tremendously powerful anti-aging industry that just wants you to focus on your skin and your hair and all the things that are going to go wrong and how undesirable you're going to be. But I don't feel it translates out into the real world. When you look at the real women who are killing it in their 50s and 60s, they're attractive, they're desirable, charming, they're alluring, they contribute. And I just think if we can focus on the positive and try to just let those negative narratives fall away because they're not true. They're a story that we've been told. And I don't blame women. I mean, I've been watching celebrity interviews since I was a kid. And what did they always, it was always a man asking a woman, like, how are you doing in Hollywood? When the roles are drying up. If I'm watching a celebrity who's only 10 years older than me answer those questions, that's going to happen to me. So in a way, I kind of just stick my fingers in my ears and go, la, 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 and we're doing that. Gen X is really doing it. So I think it's going to be easier for the next generation.
Excellent. What insights. I absolutely love that. Thank you for sharing that. And I love that positive outlook. Again, all the way through, I can feel this very positive energy, very positive vibe from you. So I think that's also probably helped you get through this and do such a good job. Now we've come to the segment of our show where I'll ask you some rapid fire questions, our version of a game show. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Well, this is a bit of a longer question, but maybe a quicker answer. Brain fog. We often hear about women talking about brain fog. What strategies or tips would you suggest to help manage and reduce brain fog?
We're really at the beginning of the understanding how much gut health and perimenopause symptoms intersect. And in my own personal experience and what I'm hearing from women, gut health is very key in this area. And I know when I eat some foods that are not good for me, brain fog is a part. It's also, if you are not sleeping, you're going to have brain fog. So whatever way that you can to get your sleep organized. And so many people have really bad sleep hygiene and then hormonal problems layer on top of that. So I would say sleep and gut. Look at what's happening there and you might find clarity.
Excellent. We mentioned earlier, you spoke about some superfoods. Do you have a favorite superfood?
Oh my goodness. I have so many things that I take. It's kind of a joke. My superfood is eating whole foods. So my superfood is as little processed food as possible. That is an excellent guiding goal. And I had a lot of pain in perimenopause, body pain. And it wasn't until I went on something called the Whole30 diet and 10 days in had 90% of the pain gone that I really started to put together food and inflammation. And I think if you're eating processed food, it's a treat. And you'll start to realize how quickly whole food and as little processed as possible is the superfood.
I think real food's always the best way to go. Excellent. Do you have a favorite exercise hack?
Well, I don't think you need to exercise incredible amounts. That's my hack. I was very, very busy running the arts and life department at the National. And when I realized I did a 25-minute exercise, I did sprints on the treadmill, sprints and walking, and I did a really tough Pilates workout for 10 minutes. And I was in great shape and I got great comments about my physique. I've also done laborious hours of things, spinning and then Bikram. It's weightlifting and walking. When you pass through menopause and perimenopause, that's actually your best friend. And it doesn't have to be hours and hours, just lifting weights and walking if you don't have energy to do anything else.
Excellent. And what is one thing you do every day, no matter how busy you get?
Every day I drink a ton of water, and I always have. Anyone who knows me knows how much water I drink. It gives us life. We need to drink water. There's many things I love to do, like walk outside in the morning in the park and jump on my trampoline and, snuggle with my cat or whatever. But drinking water, you can do that every day.
I think sun, breathing, and water, basically 3 things, can make a huge difference.
Sun and breath is very important.
Super. Well, thank you for playing along. That was easy enough. Now, before we wrap up, we'd like to do our green pill moment. Could you please share an inspiring or life-changing experience that you have gone through? Your green pill moment.
There's really 2. One of them is moving overseas because but we're surrounded by people who've made that big move and they understand how much that expands you as a person. I'm going to have to say menopause because the transition that I went through there's a crazy year where you're not having a period, that you're not quite in menopause yet. As I'm coming out of it, I feel so much like me. And I realize how much of my life I spent feeling uncomfortable in my own skin, putting other people's feelings and desires before my own comfort, thinking other people knew more than me. And, obviously they do in certain situations, but not trusting myself. The confidence and self-trust that I have developed in the last couple of years is insane. And the sort of inner peace and calm that have come with it. I just get so emotional because I just want people to know how powerful and wonderful it is, even though it's surrounded by a lot of confusion and physical symptoms and hardships. You're shedding the skin of the life you've had until now, and you're emerging a person who can do what she really wants to do in her heart for the rest of the time she has left.
Wow, I love that. That's absolutely beautiful. What you've shared throughout this conversation, knowledge, finding, knowing, understanding, gives you that clarity. You don't have the fear anymore. Then you can take it on with a whole different mindset, which is, again, the positivity that I've been getting from you throughout this conversation.
I just want to say one last thing. I've always been like that, but I've always been scared. This has helped me realize that we don't need to be scared.
By taking on this challenge. And what I love about it is that you had a need for yourself, as I said earlier, but you were also thinking of others. You could have just figured it out for yourself and said, wow, fantastic, Anne-Marie, you've done such a job. But there you go. You said, no, this needs to be out there for other women to benefit from. And I absolutely love that you're giving back to other women so that they don't have to suffer. They don't have to necessarily do all the research because you've collected it all together for them. So thank you for that. Thank you for thinking of others and creating this solution for others. It's absolutely brilliant.
Thank you.
Now, before we say goodbye, could you please tell our listeners where they can find and follow you? And we'll also put this in the show notes.
Okay, great. Well, it's Hot Flash Inc. everywhere. TikTok, Instagram, X. My podcast is Hot Flash Inc. podcast, and you can find it anywhere you find podcasts. And I'm at hotflashinc.substack.com. That's where my newsletter comes out of. And then my website is Hot Flash Inc. If you Google Hot Flash Inc., you can find me.
We'll find you all over the place. Brilliant. Again, thank you so much for joining me today. I absolutely thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I learned a lot. And I for sure will be following you and your journey as well.
Thank you so much for having me.
If you enjoy our conversations, please like and subscribe. See you next Wednesday.